You're listening to the No Gray Areas podcast with Patrick McCullough. Today's guest is Bob Fabey, founder and CEO at Fabey Insights. Throughout their conversation, Bob helps us to see the dignity in all humans. Let's listen in.
Bob, thanks for being on No Gray Areas, this podcast. As I was sharing with you, this podcast is really about a book a friend of mine wrote, a story that's being made into a movie. It's about character issues, the choices that we make, good or bad, kind of a cautionary tale, but also a redemptive story. But you are someone, we've known each other for quite a while. In fact,
a while.
We grew up in the same town.
Yep.
Funny story there. But tell us a little bit about your life. Like, you're from Missoula, Montana.
That's right. Yep. The last best place.
Yes.
That's what we say in
Yes.
Montana. Yeah. I'm happily married at 26 years to Amy.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. And 2 kids, 21 and 19. I'm
Yeah.
trying to learn how to parent through that season.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Been in the ministry world for almost 30 years now in different capacities for the last 10 years. I'm happily been an Anglican, and I'm an Anglican priest.
Yeah.
So I'm not wearing my collar today,
Yeah.
but yeah, I get to function
You're
that way.
always wearing your collar.
I'm
but
always wearing the
sometimes it's just
collar.
not on.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. And you wrote a book,
Mhm.
fascinating book,
Yeah.
interesting book. In fact, especially if someone could see the cover. So for the listeners, the title of the book is Not My Jesus.
Mhm.
And if you describe the cover, how would you describe it?
Well, it would be a collection of how our culture looks at Jesus. So, hipster glasses and cigarettes and coffee and political kind of stuff on
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Probably a picture that they've never really seen of Jesus.
I would think
he's
that's
holding
true.
a cell phone. He's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, holding a Starbucks coffee.
Mhm.
Yeah. But on the back of the book, here's what it says. Understanding who he is, Jesus, and who he is not is the key to knowing ourselves and how we are to live.
Mm.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
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 What do you mean by that?
Well, what happens, I think, primarily for Christians, but also for non-Christians, is that we think we have an idea about who Jesus is, and then we function from that idea. And for many people, they believe that Jesus is there for, hey, he's really great. He forgives me. I get to go to heaven. This is going to be perfect. And then my job then is to judge everyone, and Jesus can love them. When in fact,
I bet a lot of our audience are
it's
nodding
just-
in agreement.
I know, right? So and so in fact, what's true is that Jesus is the judge. That's who he is, and then he's asked us to love people. So love God, love your neighbors, this great commission, great commandment, and then even love your enemies.
So almost
And-
reverse what we often do, right?
Right, exactly. And so
Yeah.
if Jesus is our true north, and we say, well, let's take what we do from him and from who he is, and then allow him to give us our identity that shapes everything about us. And for those people who don't know Christ yet, what I think it means is that he's there, and that's who he is. And then it's like, hey, listen, you don't know this yet, but you were made in his image, and you're beautiful, and you're amazing, and you have the opportunity to reflect a good and loving God to a world that desperately needs it. Well, that shapes people's lives in a wonderful way.
Yeah. So why did you write this book?
Well, honestly, I tried not to. I
Really?
kept putting it off. I thought I
Yeah.
don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to write a book. And you have to ask the question: are you a speaker who writes, or are you a writer who speaks? I would say I'm probably a speaker who writes. So writing isn't necessarily my first serve. So I really realized that this was something that I think was out of obedience. It was like, I
Yeah.
need to keep doing this. And
Yeah.
every time I tried not to do it, it was like, no, you need to write this. But hopefully it's a way for people to engage in the fact that our culture is saying things about who Jesus is and who Christians are and how they're supposed to behave. And hopefully it's a way for people to look at it and go, well, why don't we take the scripture seriously? And let's take our guide from that versus our culture.
Yeah. Do you think it's more than just our Western culture? Do you think most cultures struggle
Every
with
single one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
funny you mentioned that, because I think in the book I talk about being in Africa
Yeah.
and
you
seeing
do.
the Holy Family, and
Yeah.
the Holy Family is black. And of course it is, because that's how people think about the Holy Family.
Yeah.
Well, chances are Mary wasn't, and that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're a surfer, you have kind of the surfer dude Jesus,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we almost create Jesus in our own image.
Exactly.
And what are the dangers of that?
Well, I think you wind up creating echo chambers is what happens. So you think of Jesus a particular way, and that Jesus likes you and you're like Jesus, and so there's no problem. And then you wind up creating people around you, and people just kind of flock to that version of Jesus. So you wind up with this echo chamber where Jesus would never think that way, or Jesus wouldn't act that way, and everybody around you agrees. Well, in fact, there is multiple different ways of looking at that situation, and it could be that you're wrong.
Wow. So what's come out of this, like from writing this one?
Lots of conversations for sure.
Probably just from the cover of the book.
Lots from the cover of the book. I think there's been a lot of fruit that's come out of it that I've been really pleased about, and primarily in the fact that I've had really meaningful conversations with an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
I've spoken in churches, obviously, and used the book as that, and people are curious because of the cover. They say, well, what is this about? But the cover is a tell. Right. So if somebody looks at the cover and they go, well, I won't read that. Well, that tells me everything I need to know about your version of Jesus. Yeah. And whether or not it's actually the biblical Jesus or not. And so the conversation.
Do you mean from that if they're probably going just from the cover, they're probably admitting, if they're offended by it, that they have a cultural Jesus.
They do.
And they're unaware of it.
Well, or and their culture Jesus may be that so here's an example. So I was on a radio program and doing an interview about the book. I think it was in the South. And this guy was talking to me, and he was saying, so Bob, about your book cover, he says, you got Jesus doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And he says, and maybe the worst thing is that you gave him a cigarette. Yeah. And I said, I understand why that's problematic. I said, but I think it's worse that I gave him blue eyes and light skin. Wow. And it was just radio silence. And I thought I didn't mean to have a gotcha moment with the guy, but what happened is that he assumed that Jesus looks just like him. And so he just overlooked the fact that I made him white and gave him blue eyes. Yeah. And it was like, well, we all do this. Let's take it seriously. Let's think about how I've made Jesus in my image. Yeah. And then peel that back and let him speak to me about that. So
that's been part of my journey as you and I, friends, have talked. It's been transforming for me to start recognizing that I had a cultural Jesus. Didn't realize it necessarily, but I had a cultural Jesus, and I'm still trying to come out of that. Yeah. I'm still trying to peel back blinders that I may have. Yeah. Things that I was taught, sometimes subtly.
Even in the church, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. So, mostly in church. Well, and then if I'm honest and humble enough, I'd probably say that I've taught sometimes.
You bet.
Guaranteed. I've taught some cultural things about Jesus that weren't necessarily true.
Right. Yeah. And I think we would all fall into that category when we choose not to kind of take a pretty hard look at it. Yeah. And it's been helpful, I think, over the past several years where people have had the opportunity to speak into that a lot more, whether it's people of color or other places, and say, hey, this has been my experience. And you go, whoa, we need to reevaluate this a little bit. Yeah. Not from the fact that Jesus is Messiah, but what does that mean? And what does it mean to me? And how do I not make him just, the white version of what that means?
Well, that has led you into another book that you're working on, right? And something that you just ooze this. This comes out of you, this idea of dignity. And so I guess you said you wrote the first book out of obedience. Yeah. You're a speaker first, writer second, right. But here you are writing another one.
I know, I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. So, but man, anybody that knows you, Bob, is so perfect for you because it's the core of who you are, is believing in the dignity of people. So what is this book about? Dignity, obviously, but dig into it a little bit. And then why did you have to write this one?
Yeah, well, I think it was an outworking of the first one. And I was trying to answer some questions that I was asking about the first book. And primarily, I mean, if we say as Christians, people are made in the image of God, and that everybody's made in the image of God, then we have to take seriously how we interact with one another. And when you watch how the world interacts with one another, it doesn't look that differently than how the church is interacting with the world. And that's really troubling.
Okay, I want to make sure no one missed what you just said.
Okay.
Because that's so good. You're saying if we believe that we're created in the image of God, that's what we as Christians or Jesus followers would claim. But you're saying that we don't often act that out very well.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, I think that if the church actually did that really well, that it would be a place that people would come running to when they need it. and that when culturally we experience so much tumult, that the people would look at the church and they would say, those are the kinds of people I want to be with, and they're the kind of people I want to be like.
So
and I
tie
think,
dignity and being created in the image of God together.
so the way that I think about that is that I think Jesus affirmed the dignity in people in many different ways and settings. But you take somebody like Zacchaeus, for instance, who for most people is behaving in all the wrong ways. And Jesus says, I see you. I want to spend time with you. And never once does he talk to him about his behavior. He just spends time with him in a way that's meaningful. And I'm not saying that we can't say things about people's behavior. There's a big difference between behavior and identity. And that's part of the problem, I think, too, is that people...
Yeah,
I'll try to unpack
Yep,
that a little
unpack
bit.
that.
I
That's
saw your
good.
eyebrows go down.
Yeah,
Like, wait.
yeah. This is why I hang
So-
out with you, Bob. I always learn from you.
So I think part of the challenge is that people can behave in different ways, and that's how respect is earned or lost. So I can respect how people behave, or I cannot respect how people behave, but I will always treat them with dignity, because dignity is an identity. So, for instance, if somebody says, you will respect me, I think you've already lost respect because you're demanding it
Yeah.
and you've done nothing to earn it.
Yeah.
Or you haven't done something that makes sense to me that would cause me to go, wow, I really respect that. Whether that's how somebody mourns or how somebody loves or how somebody behaves, whatever the thing may be.
Mhm.
And so what happens is that I can look past somebody's behavior. I don't have to talk to them about that in order to treat them as if they were made in God's image. So I've literally said to strangers, I mean, you know me well enough. This is the kind of thing I wind up doing.
Yeah.
I've literally said to people, I know you better than you do,
Wow.
because I know who made you
Yeah.
and I know why they made you. And it's
Yeah.
to uniquely reflect him to the rest of this world around us.
Yeah.
And so
people inherently have the dignity
It is-
simply because their identity is they're created in the image of God.
that's right.
We're
And
the pinnacle of God's creation.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that needs to be the basis for our interaction with everyone, including family members and people we don't agree with and people we don't like.
Yeah.
Period.
So when you're hanging out with me
Mm-hmm.
and I do something that makes you lose respect,
Mm-hmm.
my behavior,
Mm-hmm.
you don't respect me because of my inappropriate behavior, perhaps, but that doesn't change my identity or my worth or my dignity. That's what you're saying.
Right. And so if you were to behave in a manner that I don't agree with, I could just simply call it a behavior instead of pat.
Yeah, and that's what we often do as human beings, isn't it?
Well,
not just as
We
Christians,
just call
but as
people
human
names
beings.
and we just objectify people.
Yeah.
So in the first book, I have a whole chapter about objectification, and I'm writing about that again because that's, I think, part of the problem. But so my argument in with regards to dignity is, from a Christian perspective, is that this has to be based in God's image, the Imago Dei. The ancient church as well.
Yeah. So
established
Imago
in
Dei.
image
Explain
of
that
God.
if someone heard that didn't know. Okay.
It means the image of God.
Okay.
It's just Latin.
Yep.
Makes people think they're smart.
Yeah.
So
But that comes from, again, the very beginning
Very
of the narrative
beginning,
where,
right.
where God says, out of all of his creation, we as humans were created
Yeah.
in his image.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's embedded in Christianity, and I think that that's the reason for the growth of Christianity in the first couple centuries. And that's a whole nother story. From if you take that though, and you say, okay, well, what if I don't believe in Jesus? What's the case? And I think there's people out there like Donna Hicks, who's written about dignity, where she argues from a secular standpoint that people have dignity. And she'll use actually evolutionary biology in order to get there, to talk about the dignity of people. So my thought was, coming out of this book, I thought, if we're going to talk about how we need to be with one another and how we need to love people and how we need to treat them well, I want to have two coins, two sides of the same coin. To say this coin is about dignity. I'm taking my lead from Jesus. Other folks are going to take their lead from other places. Doesn't matter to me as long as dignity is the thing.
Yeah. So let's get a little political here in
Sure.
a sense, to just give myself and the audience, I guess, some practical ways to live this out. So right now, all you have to do is get on social media and turn
Sure.
on the news.
Yep.
And there's a lot of different opinions about how we handle this COVID and all these other things.
Yep.
If we were treating each other with dignity and you and I had a completely different understanding on how we should handle one of those things, what would it look like?
Are we both Christians?
Okay, let's argue both. Let's say at first, yes, we are,
Okay.
and then the next one, I want to say you are and I'm not.
Sure. So the reason I asked that question is because I have a different answer. If you're a Christian and I want to know from you what it looks like, to practice dignity, we have to take the scriptures seriously. So that has to be our basis. And
Yeah.
just the period. Like that's going
Yeah.
to change how we look
Yeah.
at this.
So
But so let's say you're an anti-max. You don't want to wear masks, and I
Yeah.
want to wear a mask. Well, okay.
so
That's
you're,
it. Do you want to wear a mask? I want to wear a mask. You don't want to wear. Okay.
because you're going back to it. It doesn't change.
Well, why would that change how I treat you?
Yeah,
It wouldn't.
because
It doesn't.
I'm created in the image of God. You're
That's
created in
right.
the image of God.
Yeah. And is this a matter of division for brothers and sisters in Christ? It's not from the scriptures.
Yeah.
There's nowhere in the scriptures that says COVID is why you should divide. So
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. So
Yeah,
people who are
yeah.
leaving churches over COVID mandates, I think there's
Yeah.
a different
You're
issue
saying
going on.
that as an Anglican priest.
I am saying that as a Christian and an
I'm gonna
Anglican
take-
priest. And
I
all
I
those
would
things.
agree with you. I would
Yeah.
agree with you.
But you
Okay.
get what I'm saying, and I
I
know that it's
do.
awkward because it's like, I don't care if you wear a mask or not.
Yeah.
If you choose, fine.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're vaccinated or not. If you choose, that's okay.
But that's where this gets really practical, our
Mhm.
conversation, because
Yeah.
this is a very heated discussion right
Yeah.
now, and this is where practically we play out this dignity.
Yeah.
This,
Well, it's so fear-based, honestly, Pat. And whether people think it's fear because of the media or whatever, but it's like, what am I afraid of? And well, I'm afraid of getting sick. Okay, you should wear a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're really afraid, that makes sense. But we also have to recognize that the scriptures say perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly loved by Christ. I don't need to convince you of anything. We're good.
and if we go back to the basis of it all, it's just treat each other with dignity,
It's-
regardless of.
Right. So then
So
if,
what
if
would
somebody's
we do?
not a Christian.
Yeah. Well,
So if somebody's not a Christian and let's just say that they're upset with me because I'm choosing to wear a mask and they're, and what I would say is, well, what would it look like for me to love you?
yeah.
And just let them answer.
Yeah.
And say, okay, I can do that. Or maybe I can't, but I want to show you that I love you.
This is a side issue, but Bob, this is what you're really good at. You do this with me when we meet. You ask a question, then you just leave it hanging there. And sometimes I'm really uncomfortable because I'm like,
sorry.
I don't know if I know the right answer.
That's not great for podcasts.
Yeah.
Awkward
but
pause.
it's actually, I've learned a lot from you about
Mm.
conversation and
Mhm.
how to do conversation well, because you're really good at that. You ask some very good, deep questions,
Mm.
and you've coached me in some ways
Oh,
really
I
well with
appreciate that.
So yeah, I appreciate that. So how does someone get a hold of you? How does someone connect with you? You've got a second book coming out, and I can't recommend. I mean, the first one I read, Not My Jesus, so good. It's helped transform some of my thinking. You got another one coming out. How do
Mhm.
they connect?
Well, I mean, I'm on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I have bobfabey.com if you want to go there and check that out.
Okay.
On the business
bobfabey.com.
side, I have the Fabey Insights webpage. You can check
Fabey
that out.
Insights.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep. And the book is actually at the editor. So the working title is Dignity Wins. But I may find out, I'm going to meet my editor here in a couple weeks, and I may find out that I need a new title and I have to rewrite the entire
Yeah.
thing. You never know. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. That happens with movies and books all the time, right? So,
yeah.
man, I really appreciate it, Bob. And maybe when you get that book out, I'll have you back on and talk more about this
That's-
very, very important issue.
That'd be great.
But I end every podcast with the guest, and it's fun because it's ironic with this no gray areas. I'm going to ask you to lie to me
Okay.
and the audience to try to figure out 2 truths and a lie about yourself. So
Okay.
they've been listening to you for about 20 minutes. See if they can guess
Okay.
the lie. Go
Okay.
ahead. 2 truths and a lie.
Okay. So do you want me to tell you which one's which? No, I'm joking. Okay. I have placed Mr. Potato Head in the middle of Red Square in Soviet Russia. Okay.
Okay.
I
That's so great.
I have, how do I put it? I'm just going to say the word naked. I was naked in an Eskimo hut in a Binome, Alaska, in a sweat lodge.
Okay.
And I have previously owned an ice cream stand in Western Montana.
Oh, man. See, the audience is going to, this is tough for them, but I know you. I'm going to say, I can totally see you placing a Mr. Potato Head. I'm going to say that's the truth.
Okay. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep. It was hilarious, by the way.
Yeah.
So I had a Mr. Potato Head because the kids, it was around the time the gnome was taken from somebody's yard, and it showed up around the world.
Yeah.
So I did that with a Mr. Potato Head.
You just started.
I took pictures of him at the Eiffel Tower. I took pictures of him everywhere, and then right there in Red Square.
Yeah, you were trying to have Mr. Potato Head become as famous as the gnome.
It didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Mr. Potato Head's way cooler.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other one was you were naked in an igloo sweat lodge up in Alaska.
Yeah, it wasn't an igloo, but yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And then an ice cream stand.
I owned
in
an
Western
ice cream
Montana.
stand in
Oh,
Western
man.
Montana. Yeah.
I'm gonna say the sweat lodge was a true one.
It is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was up by Nome and trying to get clean, and the way you get clean is you go into it's called a mulkek,
Yeah.
and it's really hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that you were recently up there speaking to a men's group?
So
that
I
just
was,
recently?
but that wasn't recently. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was up there in February speaking at a men's
Yeah.
retreat, and then but I had done that in man, it would have been 90, 94, 95.
Yeah.
So it was a while ago.
That's great. So
Yeah.
you never did own an ice cream stand?
No, because
Yeah.
I'm a terrible business person.
Yeah.
I'd give the ice cream away.
You would eat-
Somebody would look. No,
Yeah.
I don't
you'd
care
give it
for it.
away.
I'd just
Yeah.
give it away. I'd be like,
Here, I believe
you look
in
like
your
you
dignity.
Want, that's right.
Yeah.
I would just be like, you look like you want some ice cream. Here you go.
You would. You would.
I would.
can
That'd
see
be
that.
terrible.
Well,
Yeah.
Bob, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. I can't wait for your new book to come out.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
thank you, my friend.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the No Gray Areas podcast. To dive deeper into the story, be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and check out nograyareas.com.